Hello and welcome to the 17th bonus video in the 20 years of MCF celebration. I'm MCFPapa. In this video I'll be covering the Eipix Era of MCF, which is all 9 of the games that were developed by Eipix Entertainment. A year after Dire Grove Sacred Grove, Eipix released Key to Ravenhearst. I'm not sure if a Ravenhearst sequel was what Elephant was planning to make next, or if this is something Eipix wanted to do to try and establish themselves in the series right away. For the first time since Return to Ravenhearst, we're sent on a mission by the Queen of England. Someone has bought Ravenhearst and rebuilt the mansion. The story picks up right away with us meeting with Agent Barker and receiving a weird puzzle box crafted by Alistair, and I think this is a great addition. All throughout the game we'll find items that are used to unlock another puzzle in this device, and the box has layers and layers to it. Each one completed gives us another item to use, and we get to hear new lines from Alistair taunting us, so he has more of a presence over the course of the whole story. Some of these puzzles even reference Ravenhearst's past, like the Whack-a-Troll game or the memory matching game that shifts and rotates as you play it. My favorite of these puzzles is one that's a recreation of the classic Flash game Bloxors. Not long after our arrival, Agent Barker takes a nasty fall and dies. This brings up something that would be consistent in all the Eipix era. They're much more comfortable showing people being killed in their games. In the earlier games, most of the time deaths would be implicit, or just be unnamed random background characters, or have taken place so long ago that the body's just a skeleton or a ghost now. It's not necessarily a good or bad change, but it does mark a tonal shift for the series, and perhaps the generally darker tone they're going for is why there's far less humor in MCF games from this point onwards. Eipix did a decent job recreating several areas from earlier Ravenhearst games, like Victor's Cottage and the main gate. However, the interior of the manor itself looks nothing like it did in the games, and once again this is a Ravenhearst entry where we're barely even in Ravenhearst Manor itself, instead spending a lot more time in the surrounding and underground areas. Once more we even climb to the top of the lighthouse to direct the light beam, though this time it shows a mysterious ghost town briefly. And despite not spending much time in Ravenhearst itself, I do enjoy the new areas, especially the ship that's run aground on its side and gives a neat perspective as you investigate it. In this game they still have super puzzles, but they're a lot fewer and farther between. There's only 4 in the main game, significantly less than what there were in the Elephant Era games. And the ones that were in the game I really enjoyed. I just wish there was a bit more of them. But having rare super puzzles is a staple for all of these Eipix games, pretty much. I mentioned how Elephant introduced alternate hidden object scene types to the series in Dire Grove Sacred Grove. However, in this game it goes back to having only the 12 item hidden object scenes, with a few interactive objects. From this point on in the series, I won't be discussing the puzzles and hidden object scenes nearly as much as I did in earlier games, because they really don't have nearly as much going on to differentiate themselves. They're perfectly serviceable, but not nearly as special feeling or innovative as some of the earlier ones. Benedict Caldwell is the one who has bought and rebuilt Ravenhearst, turning it into a museum. However, he wasn't really responsible for these actions, rather he was being mind-controlled by Dalamar forces. I like Benedict as a more tragic character. how we worked to help him break free from his mind control, but just as we managed to get through to him and have him help us, he's unfortunately killed off and placed in a soul chamber in order to fuel the resurrection of Alistair's new body. At least we avenge him by overloading Alistair's machine and freeing all the souls that were trapped, and I enjoy the visual of all the victims' spirits being freed and going up into the air. That's something not even Escape from Ravenhearst did, even though there were quite a few victims in that game too. Now, if you just stop this part of the retrospective right here, you'd probably think I believe Key to Ravenhearst is a bit flawed, but a decent enough sequel to the Ravenhearst storyline. But you'd be quite wrong, because there's two antagonists I haven't mentioned yet, Gwendolyn and Charlotte Somerset. Yes, the same twins from the other Ravenhearst games. This is what I consider to be the single worst moment in the entire MCF series. I don't think anything any developer does in the series in the future will ever get as bad as this low point. So allow me to calmly, rationally, and reasonably explain why I loathe this moment with every fiber of my being. First, it makes absolutely no sense for the game to say that, quote, Rose's innocent daughters are of the Dalamar bloodline. No, they aren't. If any of the Eipix developers had actually bothered to play Return to Ravenhearst, then they would know about the multiple papers in that game which talk about how Rose was married to Reginald Somerset and how he's the father of the twins. Charles had no prior connection with Rose at all. She was just a random nursemaid he happened to hire. Even in Escape from Ravenhearst, we see that in the asylum, Charles was focused on Emma, not Rose. It was only after killing Emma that Charles's insane obsession turned to Rose and began to view her as his true love. The only child Charles had with Rose was Victor, born after he had taken Rose and her daughters into captivity. Now, Charles raping Rose to have Victor is probably the single darkest plot point in the series, but it's factually impossible that Rose would have been raped earlier by Charles to have the twins. You know why? Because Rose wouldn't be stupid enough to work for her rapist. And as we see in Ravenhearst, Rose isn't even aware Charles is evil, whereas if he had already done stuff to her like that, she would most certainly know he was evil. But besides the fact that Gwen and Charlotte aren't biologically Dalamars, it makes absolutely no sense why they would even want to continue the Dalamars' work. Charles kept their mother locked in a twisted prison, never allowed them to ever see her, and raped and murdered and tortured her. As for the twins themselves, Charles kept them imprisoned in a similar complex, and they were tortured by both Charles and Victor. Since their ghosts are children, that means that Charles must have murdered them when they were pretty young, so that would be quite traumatic for them. But even as ghosts, they were tortured by the Dalamars for around 110 years of captivity. They would want to be as far disassociated with the Dalamars as they possibly could, and wouldn't in a million years want to join them. On my first time playing this game, I thought it was setting up some sort of twist where the twins were being mind-controlled or corrupted by Alistair in some way. But no, the plot is entirely serious that they are evil, and there's no redemption for them. Fate's Carnival made me love Madame Fate even more. Dire Grove Sacred Grove made me appreciate the setting of Dire Grove a lot more. The stupid decision to ruin Gwendolyn and Charlotte in Key to Ravenhearst made me retroactively more negative when I would play Return and Escape, because all the efforts to rescue the twins in those games turned out to be for absolutely nothing. And the kicker is, this was a totally unnecessary decision. The games didn't need the twins to be antagonists at all, because there was already Alistair Dalamar, a top-tier villain who could have been the only antagonist in the game, and the plot would play out largely the same. In the Collector's Edition bonus game, we get to play as Benedict Caldwell himself, and this marked the first point in the series we'd play as someone other than the Master Detective. But this would be common for most bonus games from this point onwards in the series. Troubled by the strange visions he's been having, he checks himself into the Manchester Provincial Lunatic Asylum. Now, it made perfect sense for Charles to be in such a place, because in the late 1800s asylums like this were incredibly common, but I really doubt an asylum like this would even still be in operation in 2015, and it wouldn't look basically the same as it did back in the day. It would look a lot more cleaner and sterile. At least they did a decent job recreating many of the asylum's areas, and I will say it's interesting to get to see the real place and interact with actual people in it, instead of just the mannequins that were there in Escape from Ravenhearst. Also in the CE, there are ravens to find in every one of the rooms in the game. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! In each of the hidden object scenes, there's a morphing object. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! They have what's called a souvenir room, and this is basically going through each area of the game to find a new item in each of them. And do you know what you get for doing this? Nothing! The CE also contains a behind the scenes video Eipix made where they say things like how they love mystery case files and are huge fans of the series, which raises the question of how the heck they made such an idiotic plot point in this game. Maybe it's just a case of they didn't care about the old stuff. They were the ones in control of the series now, and they were gonna tell the story they wanted, and if it contradicts or diminishes elements of earlier entries, well, too bad, you gotta deal with it. I got that same sort of impression from the Star Wars sequel trilogy, which also happened to begin in 2015. And okay, maybe it wasn't out of genuine malice, but just a fundamental misunderstanding where they didn't understand the lore properly. Either way, it gave me a terrible first impression for Eipix as a Mystery Case Files developer. I'm not sure what the heck Elephant would have done in a potential Ravenhearst sequel of their own. Probably something to do with 7 candles in a still house. But at the very least, I'm quite confident that Elephant's version of this game wouldn't have pissed me off nearly as much. And because of this, for the rest of the Eipix era, I was just basically going through the motions, playing the new entries because of my love for the other games in the series. And it was due to me viewing Key to Ravenhearst so poorly that I looked upon the tales of earlier games with a renewed curiosity, especially Escape from Ravenhearst and Shadow Lake. And while yeah, they aren't as good as the other Big Fish Studios games, they're quite a bit better than the Eipix Era ones. And it took me a while, but in 2015, a decade after the series began, and a decade ago now, I had finally come to enjoy every entry made by Big Fish Studios themselves. Ravenhearst Unlocked released just a month after Key to Ravenhearst, which is the shortest time between entries that the MCF series has ever had. Now obviously they didn't manage to work on and make the game in just a month. They finished Key to Ravenhearst and held off on releasing it for a while they finished Ravenhearst Unlocked. This shocked me when I saw Ravenhearst Unlocked coming out in 2015, because I was fully expecting MCF games to only come out once a year, but for most years from this point onwards we would instead be getting 2 per year. The story begins with us in the Manchester Provincial Lunatic Asylum. Yes, the same exact asylum we were just at in the bonus game a month prior. In the asylum, we deal with Charlotte as a villain, and just to make me angry and rub salt in the wound of what Eipix did, she calls herself Charlotte Dalamar instead of Charlotte Somerset. Something notable about this section is that at one point we're looking through the security cameras and Charlotte is portrayed by a real person. The only time post Big Fish Studios that any live actor full motion video was used. It's only a few seconds, but it was very nice to see regardless. Eipix would often take pictures of real people and digitize them for the in-game characters, and this led to many of them looking very strange in my opinion and not that good. And with how poor the animation was of them talking, I wish they had just gone with either fully live actors or made just fully originally drawn characters, not some weird in-between. After the asylum, we once more return to Ravenhearst, and once more it is a burned out husk. We've never seen that before in the series. At least, though, the area is quite familiar to how it looked in Key to Ravenhearst, just destroyed. And we even get a bit of extra use out of Alistair Delamar's puzzle box, but it soon breaks down too. It just irks me that for the 4th straight Ravenhearst game, we barely spend any time within Ravenhearst Manor itself. We see the resurrected Alistair kill Gwendolyn by stabbing her. Oh no! Anyway, by killing her, he resurrects the ghost town we briefly saw teased in Key to Ravenhearst. It's from 1495, and we spend the rest of the game exploring this medieval town and its occupants. The people in the town don't seem to be ghosts that were resurrected, but rather it seems that they were just trapped underwater by Dalamar for all this time. It's very cool to have a medieval-themed MCF adventure, and I enjoy some of the decorative elements like planes and bombs from, like, warfare being crashed here in the town too. However, it being so closely tied to Ravenhearst just feels frankly ridiculous. Cedric Ravenhearst is the lord of this town, a miraculous coincidence that Cedric had a conflict with Alistair Dalamar 500 years prior to his descendant Emma, who was an American and just so happened to return to the same exact area her ancestor lived, became the obsession of Alistair's son Charles. I will at least give them a bit of credit though. There's plenty of evidence we learn that Cedric Ravenhearst was a despotic and cruel ruler. I like the message that just because one of your ancestors was awful, you can still turn out to be a good person like Emma did. And that even creates a nice contrast between the two families, where the Ravenhearst family was willing to grow and change over the years, while the Dalamars remain stuck in their evil ways. While exploring the town, we meet Ellen Hornbolt. She's someone I used to only call the medieval master detective, because I think she only mentions her game once when we do the box super puzzle Alistair put on her head to trap her. I didn't even pick up on her real name when I first played the game in 2015, or even in the second time I played it back in 2022 for the non-commentary series on it. But at the very least I know it from this point onwards, because I discovered it while researching for this retrospective series. Ellen was a master detective back in 1495, yet another amazing coincidence that a Dalamar would have been investigated by a master detective in the same vicinity as someone from the Ravenhearst family centuries apart from each other. This expands the lore of the MCF agency to be something that was around for centuries, which was never really indicated at all in any of the earlier entries, but at the very least, as a lore alteration, it's one that's relatively inoffensive. Ellen herself seems kind of dumb. She intentionally locks up the master detective because she believes it's her case to finish on her own. The last time, Alistair put a weird box on her head and trapped her for centuries. I don't know why she thought she would be able to take him by herself this time. Just strange. We eventually enter Ravenhearst Castle itself, and we learn that Cedric wasn't even a good husband to his wife Morwen, who seems to quite despise him. And at one point we need to get past Morwen, but I'm sorry, when she's attacking us, the expression she makes is just so stupidly goofy. And then she burns her own face with one of her potions and falls down a pit to her death. I don't think they intended it to be a morbid humor in the same vein as Madame Fate. I think it was meant to be serious, but it's still a very funny moment and a real bright spot on this game's story, even if unintentional. But Eipix just couldn't help themselves but ruin the Ravenhearst lore even further at the end of this game. We get to the Well of Souls, and Alistair tells Cedric he will consume him just like he did his descendant Emma Ravenhearst. Boy, isn't it just so great to find out that after resurrecting everyone in the Escape, that not only have the twins become fully evil, but also Emma got killed off screen by Alistair? When did he have the time to do that? When he was constantly being killed and revived since Fate's Carnival? Why did he do that when Emma was nothing to him at all? It was only Charles who really cared at all about her. Why not at least give Emma an on-screen role in Key to Ravenhearst and Ravenhearst Unlocked? You know, she is the namesake of the mansion. What the heck does it serve the plot to reveal an off-screen character death so close to the end of the game? So many questions, so few answers. Eipix is in control of the lore, and you gotta deal with it. They don't mention in either of these games what happened to Rose at all. You would think she would try to do something about her daughters being evil, but knowing Eipix, Rose was probably killed off screens at some point too. And it's this sort of thing that led me to feel the way I do about the ending. Ellen sacrifices herself to help us destroy the Ball of Fate so Alistair can't tap into its powers. And Thanatos tries to get away once again, but Ellen's soul destroys the evil part of it, so Thanatos, and by extension Alistair as a whole, is gone for good. I think the intended reaction was supposed to be something of triumph, or maybe some heartwarming moment that Ellen would sacrifice herself to help us. But when I first played the game, all I could think of was, oh, thank God, Ravenhearst is over and done with, so they can't do anything else to mess up the lore even worse. Not a good thing for a player to feel about a game, but that's how I felt. The CE bonus game this time has us play as Alistair himself in the 1400s. It's pretty cool to get to play as an iconic villain like him, and Alistair works to put his plans in motion over the course of the bonus game and stop Ellen Hornbolt. I like seeing some new characters they introduced too, like the weird jester guy, but there just really isn't much else to say about it. It's fine, but it doesn't do much to stand out. There's also another souvenir room to play through, And this time in the main game there are lighthouses hidden in each room. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! Overall, I'd say Ravenhearst Unlocked is marginally better than Key to Ravenhearst. It makes my blood boil that they killed off Emma, but at the very least it was just a normal assassination with her, not a character assassination like they did with Gwendolyn and Charlotte. And I wasn't nearly as disappointed with Ravenhearst Unlocked. With Key, I was expecting something at least on the level of the Elephant Era MCF games, but with Ravenhearst Unlocked, my expectations were a lot lower, and so therefore it didn't let me down as much. And to its credit, the medieval setting is great and something we hadn't seen in the series before, and is a pretty creative thing to introduce. But just some of the immensely questionable lore choices made it so I really can't enjoy the game as a whole. The next game they made in this series was Broken Hour. I was a lot more positive and receptive to Broken Hour when it first came out, because for the first time since Shadow Lake, it was another entry that was new, not a sequel to an existing entry. This meant that not only would there be a bunch of new characters introduced, but it also meant there wouldn't be anything they could do to muddy the lore or ruin already existing characters. And I think just as a game, Broken Hour is better than the other two Eipix MCFs. The game begins with us being sent to Huxley's boarding house to investigate the disappearance of George Pritchard. I should note that for pretty much all the Eipix Era games, we're always being dispatched by the Queen of England herself to investigate cases, with the implication being that the Queen is the one who runs the MCF agency and gives the high-profile cases out. This is something that wasn't hinted at all in any of the earlier games, but I suppose it's a lot easier to write a reason for the Master Detective to investigate a certain location if you just say the Queen told them to for every game. This game also marks the return of the Master Detective's journal for the first time since Escape from Ravenhearst, but it doesn't really include entries sharing the Master Detective's thoughts. Instead, it's mostly just transcribing letters and what other people's comments are that we've already heard. In the boarding house, we meet a ton of new characters, and everyone is super skittish about making sure to follow the schedule. Now, most of these people only show up for 1 or 2 scenes, and their main purpose is just to get killed off. The only one of them I really like is Benjamin Wright, the ghost hunter who aspires to be part of the Ghost Patrol. The villain of this game is Meredith Huxley, daughter of Harold Wallace. Upon learning her children died, Meredith fell into despair, and so in order to save her, Harold and her husband Jacob put a mechanical heart in her which is powered by the clock. This heart stripped her of her humanity and made her obsess over the time, murdering anyone who didn't follow the schedule. In the middle part of the game, we have to do a number of errands for Meredith so she doesn't go crazy and attack us, and I enjoy getting to spend a significant amount of time with the antagonist in one of these games. I love Huxley's boarding house as a location. Since Meredith is so obsessed, it was built and expanded more and more over the years, becoming a lot more cobbled together and haphazardly connected compared to some of the other areas we've visited in the MCF series. And due to the theming of the game, gears and clocks are common in many rooms of the game, reflecting Meredith's obsession with time. And there's even a room which is like a multi-directional elevator we can use to not only get up and down to areas, but also left and right. At one point in the game, we see Emily Brooke, one of the guests again, only Meredith has cut out her eyes instead of killing her like the other guests. And we do a little puzzle where we have to find the correct jar of eyes and give them to her as some sort of comfort. I don't know what comfort that really is. It's another moment in an Eipix game which is incredibly funny to me, but I don't think it was meant to be. It just is so ridiculous, needing to hand her a jar of eyes. And I don't know why the master detective even bothered finding the correct jar. He could have just handed her a jar of anything. How's she gonna know the difference? She can't see. The game ends in a climactic confrontation inside the main clock tower where we overload the clock and send Meredith plummeting to her doom, finally putting her to rest. Ben says at the end he'll be in the Ghost Patrol for doing this story, but since we never see him in the series become part of the Ghost Patrol, I'm gonna guess his plan unfortunately didn't work out. For the bonus game, we play as an unnamed lab assistant who helps Jacob perform the operation to give both Harold and Meredith mechanical hearts. Enraged when he sees what Meredith became, Harold kills Jacob and Meredith stabs the lab assistant. In this CE, they also added morphing objects to find, this time within the rooms. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! There's a ladybug hidden in each of the hidden object scenes. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! They give an endless version of a puzzle from the end of the main game in the CE2. And here in the extras menu, you're able to play it for as long as you want to try and go for a super high score. I enjoy this scene. It's a pretty fun puzzle and a nice little bonus arcade type game. You actually need to play it at least some in order to earn enough tokens for you to unlock the other extras like concept art and wallpapers. And instead of finding random objects in rooms like the souvenir rooms, this time around there's a developer hunt, which is basically the same thing, but this time there's images of some of the developers who worked on the game. I'm not sure though how they determined who would be included and who wouldn't. Were they like, sorry Dave, I know you worked overtime for 3 months and missed all your son's baseball games just so we could manage to get the game out on time, but there's only room for 11 people in the game and so you didn't make the cut. Broken Hour was perfectly adequate as a game. You'll start to notice that many of the games from here on out will have significantly shorter segments. That's because there simply isn't as much I really feel the urge to share about them. With the earlier MCF games, I'd play them over and over again, and so I had a ton of thoughts to talk about them. But with the Eipix Era games, I've generally only played them twice. Once when they came out, and once for doing their non-commentary playthrough series for the channel. The Eipix games just don't feel special, and don't really give me any real desire to replay them for fun. The first MCF game of 2017 was The Black Veil. In this, we head to Dreadman, Scotland to investigate a mysterious aging epidemic going on. We even get to reunite with Alison Sterling from Dire Grove, much older now and working as a reporter. I enjoy getting to actually interact with her this time, since in Dire Grove itself we really didn't get the chance. And plus she manages to have a pretty sizable role in this game. And the best part about her appearance is that Eipix didn't kill her off and actually allowed her to live for the whole entire game. The journal is back once again, and this time there actually is writing from the master detective himself. I wish the font choice though was a bit better, cause in the earlier games it was a lot clearer to read, but I think what they wanted to do is make it look more like hasty scribblings the master detective quickly jots down. And fair enough, like in many of the earlier games, even in dangerous situations, the master detective would still write whole walls of text in pretty flawless manuscript. This game, however, is a good place to bring up an issue I have with the Eipix Era in general, where so many of the games use the same exact purple sky aesthetics for large chunks of their games. It made sense in Key to Ravenhearst and Ravenhearst Unlocked because they're set in the same place as Ravenhearst, and they're referencing how it looked in Escape from Ravenhearst. But then, the Black Veil, the Revenant's Hunt, the Countess, Moths to a Flame, and Black Crown all incorporate this similar sort of aesthetic as well. With earlier MCS, they had a lot more unique color palettes which made them stand out more. The purple makes so many locations from the Eipix Era blend together. Like, check out these 4 locations. They're all from different entries in the series, but just based on visuals alone, you really can't tell. In the Eipix Era, the graphics in general I find to be pretty bad at times. I think the character talking animations are the worst, but there are other aspects I don't think look very good. Many 3D models don't blend very well into their environment. Certain things look a lot more flat and basic, especially the rooms we visit. And even just the character designs in general, or even from a distance, don't look very good. But enough general talk, back to the Black Veil specifically. We briefly meet with Richard Galloway, who tricks us into activating the device in the town square. This caused Allison to age rapidly, and since it was a familiar character involved in the plot, it did make me feel a lot more invested the first time I played it than some of the other Eipix Era stories. We also get a mysterious feather that prevents us from getting old as well. I guess they did this because having the master detective slowly get around on a walker wouldn't be very fun. And for some reason in this game, the hidden object scenes only contain 9 items instead of 12. I really don't get why they did that. They put in the effort to make a new scene, why not just add a few more items in said scene? Richard is a man who gained immortality upon finding a quill from Anku, the goddess of death, in a battle during World War I. Because he had the quill in his possession, he wouldn't die, and so he pretended to be his own descendants through the years because he didn't age either. This is the same feather that stops the master detective from aging, but for most of the game, we don't really care about having the immortality from it. Instead, we just find a way to charge the feather up and then use it to open various doors for us. Richard became obsessed with Anku, and his whole plan was to lure the master detective to Dreadman so he could kill him and trap Anku when she came to claim his soul. Now this is kind of a really stupid plan. Why the heck would you mess with a deity dedicated to death when you already managed to luck out and gain immortality? The master detective's life briefly flashes before our eyes, but then Anku gives us a second chance at life. I guess because she could tell we're pure of heart and on the side of good. And so we manage to stop Richard's machine, and in his rage he destroys the quill, and at the end he says, "If only you knew what a curse it was when death came for everyone but you." This suggests he actually hated his immortality and was longing for release, but this wasn't really shown off in the plot up to this point at all. And if he did hate it so much, why did he keep the quill all this time when he could just get rid of it and then age and die? I guess it was his insanity which compelled him to keep going for so long, and only the master detective beating him was able to snap him out of his insanity. But at least at the end, we managed to save Allison and restore her youth, and we also saved Henry Sharp, the mute son of Allison's friend Maggie. And at the very end of the game, he speaks his first words, saying that he wants to be like us when he grows up. So we must have made quite an impact on him during the story. For the collector's edition, there are morphing objects in each of the hidden object scenes. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing. There are also puzzle pieces to find in each room. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Something. Not a jigsaw puzzle to complete, just an already finished puzzle that gives an extra desktop wallpaper. But it is nice to finally have a collectible in the Eipix era that isn't just collecting for the sake of collecting. You also get a Knight's Dire Fate, an endless version of a puzzle from the main game you can do as much as you want. But I think Broken Hour's endless puzzle was much better and more fun than this one. There's also a trophy room, but this has a lot less items to find and collect compared to the souvenir and developer rooms from the past Eipix games. The bonus game has us playing as an earlier Richard. I would say a younger Richard, but thanks to the feather he doesn't age, it's just him earlier in time. This bonus game shows us the beginning of his descent into madness and adds some more context to him as a villain. I just wish the bonus game was a bit longer, it's quite short. And now we get to the Revenant's Hunt. This was quite a unique entry for me in the series, but not for any good reason. I got the game when it was new back in 2017 and I played a bit of it, but it was just so dull and boring to me that I dropped it, and it wouldn't be until 2023 when it was time for me to record a non-commentary series on the channel for this game that I finally played it all the way through. So to give a bit of props to every other entry made by Eipix, even when I actively loathed some of the story choices they made, I still would play them all the way through. And I guess you could argue it's better for a piece of media to be hated and played than not causing any feelings in me and make me want to ignore it. We're sent to Avondale, Vermont to investigate the death of Malcolm DeVries, a man killed by a mysterious Revenant. It's not long before we meet Marge Hale, a nosy woman who's the town gossip. I enjoy the lit up streets of Avondale. I just wish there was more time spent within the streets itself, because the buildings I found to be very dull. At least they seem to have learned a bit from the Black Veil, and the hidden object scenes are back to their usual 12 items. And I enjoy the throwback puzzle they did, which was inspired by the nursery door puzzle in Ravenhearst. However, the map in this game is notably more basic than the ones found in past Eipix entries. I'm not sure why. The name of the Revenant we've been chasing down is Alvin Croker. We learn that Malcolm had summoned him out of guilt for what him and his friends had done, killing Alvin in a car crash and then covering it up. Alvin kills Theodore Irving, who, like an idiot, tried to stop a vengeful spirit with a shotgun. Shocker, that plan didn't work out too well. In his hunt, Alvin also kills Francis Boyle, with whom he had a daughter, Eliza. Eliza was adopted by Marge Hale, but since Eliza was a fetus inside of Francis when the car accident occurred, she's also considered guilty of the crash, and the Revenants hunting her down too. Fortunately though, before he gets a chance to kill her, we were able to recreate the accident and burn his jacket to lay Alvin's spirit to rest once more. I don't really know what the point of this story is. I guess don't conjure up a vengeful spirit. If you're feeling guilty or remorseful about a past action, confess to someone, whether a priest, a police officer, or even just a friend. That'll do a lot more to ease your conscience than summoning a murderous spirit. There's more collectible types added in the collector's edition this time around. There are some morphing objects and piles of leaves to find and get rid of. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! At least with the other two item types, there are some actual unlocks. You can find Revenant lore cards that each give a nice bit of backstory to the concept of Revenants, and in each one of the hidden object scenes there's a piece of letter to find. Collecting all of them unlocks a love letter Alvin wrote for Francis shortly before he died. In the bonus game, we play as Graham Barnes, a man who ran over George Mayer while driving and he didn't look back. Later on, him and his daughter Holly get an invite to the mayor's roadside motel. This is actually a trap set by Patricia Mayer, George's widow, and they're hunted by the Revenant of George that Patricia had summoned to get revenge, and he eventually overpowers and kills Graham. I don't feel bad for Graham at all, because you have to be a special kind of callous to run over a person and drive off even when your family's in the car with you. And I enjoy how they did a totally isolated story from the main game and show us a different reason someone would have for summoning a Revenant. The only thing I really don't get is the implication at the end that Patricia took Holly and raised her as her own daughter. I got no clue why Holly would even agree to that, especially after seeing her own father die a grisly death in front of her. Once again though, this bonus game was very short, and that's about all I can muster to write about for the Revenant's Hunt. Can you tell the game didn't really interest me that much? The next game they made was Rewind, which is definitely the most unique entry in the Eipix Era. Rather than being another point-and-click game, it instead is a full-on throwback to the classic era games where hidden objects are the primary focus. I don't really know for sure why they chose to make this game. It wasn't even to celebrate a significant milestone. The series was 13 and a half years old at this point, and it was the 17th mainline entry. I would have expected something like this for like a 20-year anniversary or like the 20th mainline entry. This game is the only one in the entire Eipix era I replay for fun, and I think it's by far the best of the MCF games they made. However, it does do several elements worse than the classic era games, which are games that had only a fraction of the dev team and technology that Eipix had access to. But the game is still quite good, I feel. The game begins with us heading to the Hotel Victory, where Victor Dalamar was spotted. The game seems like it'll be the usual point-and-click affair. However, when we open the front door, the inventory bar explodes and we get sucked into a time portal. This game is actually level-based, just like the classic era games. Each level involves investigating rooms which have a bunch of hidden objects, doing a small key puzzle, doing a door puzzle to open the room with the level's unique character, and then doing an end-of-level puzzle. There are two types of these at the end. One is a moving the tile puzzle reminiscent of the one from Huntsville and Prime Suspects, and the other is one where you have to rotate all the pieces around. There's even a time limit on these levels. But I guess to appeal to a wider audience, they do have a difficulty that totally turns it off. The Master Detective writes a ton in this game, both in the journal itself and in the case report we get at the start and end of each level. This is a great inclusion because not even in the classic era did we get the Master Detective's thoughts. It's so nice to have an MCF game where there's also a substantial amount of humor. The Master Detective's quite sarcastic in these writings, and the various characters will often have joke lines in the dining room when you rescue them. I enjoy the door puzzles in this game because they're harkening back to the way they were in Ravenhearst door puzzles, not really the super puzzles we've seen from Fate's Carnival onwards. While I love those super puzzles too, the rewind puzzles are a lot more focused on just moving and interacting objects together, not really many smaller puzzles. And these too have a lot of humorous interactions to them, like sneezing out a hot dog or scalping a mannequin with an ejected CD. And hey, score another point for rewind, they actually put door puzzles for every one of the game's full levels, which not even Ravenhearst did. What I love about the story is it finally follows up on the plot point of Victor having a time machine, something that not even the Big Fish Studios games tried to explain. Even though there are characters from all parts of the series, the only point on the timeline where it makes sense for Victor to have this time machine, still be alive, and trying to resurrect Charles is if this is Victor from after the events of Return, but before the events of Escape from Ravenhearst. And since we see how unstable and wonky the time machine is in Rewind, it makes perfect sense why Charles and Victor wouldn't be trying to use it in Escape, and why Victor didn't try to use it more offensively to stop the Master Detective during the events of the original Ravenhearst and Return. Can you believe it though? An Eipix game that actually makes improvements to the Ravenhearst lore. I'm assuming it was meant to be set between Return and Escape, and they weren't actually intending for it to be confusingly set somewhere else in the timeline. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for this. The art design is great in this game. They redesigned many characters to have a more cartoonish look. Just compare Charlotte to how she looked in Key to Ravenhearst, or how Benjamin Wright looks compared to Broken Hour. I much prefer Alison Sterling's look in this game compared to how she looked in The Black Veil. In that game they tried to recreate the likeness of the original actress from Dire Grove, but it looked very uncanny to me. By doing this to the characters, it meant that the whole cast got a consistent look which harkens back to how characters looked in the classic era. In fact, there are tons of homages to the classic era games. It's amazing to get to see the Crime Computer remote again, and this time it's in actual HD. The Crime Computer itself is actually used for analysis this time and not just for hints and skips. The case report harkens back to Huntsville's style. We use the flashlight in the pool, and we get to use the scan array in 2 different rooms. Heck, on the title screen, they actually brought back the Mystery Case Files text the way it was stylized in Millionaire. It's clear that a lot of the people on the dev team were fans of the classic MCF games and genuinely loved them, because they put in a ton of effort to recreate all these things. Which just begs the question, where were these devs who loved the series during Key to Ravenhearst and Ravenhearst Unlocked? I don't know. The devs, however, weren't totally perfect. I enjoy the map referencing Ravenhearst's blueprints, but the execution could have been a lot better. In Ravenhearst, all 6 of the floors had their own unique layouts, and there was a good amount of thought put into what went where. Like the kitchen was on the first floor while the bedrooms were on the upper floors. The floor plan for Hotel Victory makes no sense, and all the floors share the same room layout even when some of them have fewer than the 6 rooms. First of all, it's considered to have 5 floors, even though the hotel on the title screen looks like it only has 3. There's only 1 bathroom for the entire hotel that's on the first floor. For some reason, the back alley's on the 3rd floor. That's where I always see alleys, don't you? The 4th floor somehow has both the basement and the backyard garden on it. Makes total sense, doesn't it? And even though we investigate many rooms that are related to hotels, like a gym or an arcade might be in some hotel, we never actually enter a bedroom or a proper hotel room in the game. Seems like kind of a glaring omission. Of course, the biggest thing Rewind does worse than the classics is not have randomized hidden object scenes. They actually put in some randomization. They randomize the order hidden objects appear on the list, but you always have to find the same items in each visit to that particular room. The solution wouldn't have even been that hard since they already programmed in a ton of different objects for most of the scenes. Just have it be randomized where it picks 10 items out of the pool for the first visit and picks 10 out for the second visit. And since items don't respawn when you return to a scene, it makes the subsequent visits much easier, so by the end you're pretty much just clicking on everything that's left and totally clearing out the room. They also put in a short door cutscene where you physically walk to a door, and I really don't care for these because they feel like just a waste of time. There's only 3 of them, and given you go to rooms a total of 56 times in the game, they get old pretty quickly because they play every time. The classic MCFs didn't need this sort of thing, and this game didn't either. And there's only 10 levels plus a smaller 11th level to do the last puzzles and end the story. In the classic era, all the games had well over 10 levels. And given that the game has the insanely cool concept of each level being about finding a character from one of the past MCF games and bringing all of them together, it really hurts that we only got 10 levels and therefore 10 characters. And now we come to this game's Collector's Edition content. There's an electric capacitor hidden in each door puzzle. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! There's a morphing object found in every hidden object scene. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Unlockable bonus scenes just like Madame Fate. I'm just kidding. You get nothing! Instead of the bonus game, they gave additional hidden object scenes featuring the various characters, which sounds cool on paper, but all it ends up being is that they reused the images from the main game's end of level puzzles. So it's not even truly brand new scenes, which is quite disappointing. Oh, and you also get a grand total of 1 additional super puzzle to complete, which is thrown in with no rhyme or reason after the second hidden object scene, even though there are 9 scenes total and there aren't any other additional puzzles for the rest of that time. And here we see scenes featuring Lucy the Bearded Beauty and the television robot. But if you go back to the main game, the corresponding images for those levels were switched, so the TV image shows up in Lucy's level and Lucy's image shows up in the TV's level. Rather than swap the images around, they just deleted the actual characters from them. This is a pretty glaring error. I don't get why they couldn't be bothered to fix, because it doesn't seem that hard, because the image that's correct is already there. But Eipix never bothered to fix it, so it remains broken to this day. Say what you will about some of the other more disappointing or short bonus games, they'd at least add a few brand new locations and a lot more than just one puzzle to them. Often the other bonus games would give you some unique perspective, new lore reveals, or let us control a character we hadn't before. Here, all we're doing is just collecting shards of Charles to lock away, which is barely any plot at all. It's a real shame, because out of all the Eipix MCF games, this had the best potential for expansion in a collector's edition. All they would have needed to do was add a few more levels. Picture this, they add a new floor with 6 brand new hidden object scenes, 3 new levels where you find additional legacy characters. That way each level would not only have a new super puzzle, but also a new key puzzle, a new end of level tile puzzle, and perhaps even some new little puzzles within the hidden object scenes themselves. And if the bonus content was integrated into the main game, then they could have built on the already existing scenes with additional items to find in a second visit to them. There are 12 scenes in this game which only show up once, 44.4% of the 27 total rooms. Many of these were the scenes involving the specific characters, but they could have easily added additional items to find in these scenes, especially with the character gone and not taking up space in the image. Finally, I want to talk about the choice of characters. There were 2 from the Eipix Era, Benjamin Wright from Broken Hour and Henry Sharp from the Black Veil. There are 2 which are technically from earlier, but their characterizations are from Eipix Era, Gwendolyn and the TV Head, which are the versions from Key to Ravenhearst. The TV Head wasn't even a character in Escape from Ravenhearst, just a vehicle for Charles to speak with, so I don't know why they say it's from that game. And I suppose you could argue he wasn't even a character in Key to Ravenhearst, because it was just pre-recorded messages from Benedict Caldwell. So technically his first appearance as a proper character is here in Rewind. And then there are 2 characters from the Golden Era, Victor from Return to Ravenhearst and Allison from Dire Grove. And then there are 4 from the Classic Era. I love the choice of Granny Goodwill from Huntsville because it's cool to get a character from the very first game. But then there are 3 characters from Madame Fate. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore Madame Fate, and even I enjoy the 3 they chose to include, because the carnies they chose were ones who are specifically neglected in Fate's Carnival, rather than reusing ones that had good appearances in that game. Dr. Goodwell gets an absolutely perfect sly salesman voice, miles above the weird squeaky voice Elephant gave him in Fate's Carnival. Next is Franco the Excessive, who finally got a new design instead of being just a skeleton. And finally there's Lucy the Bearded Beauty, who showed up a ton in Madame Fate but was weirdly absent from Fate's Carnival. But given that the game has 10 returning characters, and that's it, it's crazy that 30% of them are from Madame Fate specifically. This could have been alleviated by having more levels and returning characters in the bonus game, and there's so many more they could have brought back. Prime Suspects, Millionaire, 13th Skull, Shadow Lake, Dire Grove, Sacred Grove. All these games are chock full of unique characters, yet none got any representation. It would have been amazing to see Mary or Lewis Lee, 10111001, Cassandra Williams, or Phil T. Rich again, just to name a few. Even Huntsville had plenty of interesting characters besides just Granny Goodwiddle they could have brought back. On the third door puzzle, there's a newspaper clipping referencing Huntsville's water being polluted. I'm not sure if they actually had plans to bring Slick Rick back but cut him out, or if they misinterpreted Gertrude Goodwiddle as the one who was dumping the pollutants. I mean, maybe she was responsible by ordering Slick Rick to do it, but I always got the impression that Stain, the silly tigers attacking innocent Nepalis, was more of a disjointed group that Gertrude ran but just told them to go crazy and do whatever they liked for crime. That's why Bill Larson doesn't do anything but eat. But besides all this, the bottom line is I do enjoy Rewind a lot. It's the only MCF game from Eipix that has enough redeeming factors to make me dismiss its flaws the way I would for games in earlier eras. At the time, I had no confidence that Eipix could ever deliver an experience on par with what Big Fish Studios had done in its Golden Era games. However, I think even Eipix could have been capable of making a game that's better than some of the classic era games, perhaps even better than Madame Fate itself, if they had continued to make games in this style and kept on refining and improving each one of them. If Eipix had switched to a hybrid format where every year they'd release one of their games in the point-and-click style and one in the classic hidden object style, then I would have been a lot more favorable about the Eipix era as a whole. As it stands, I'm really glad we managed to get Rewind, but given how it was just a one-off, it seems bringing back the classic era style didn't really appeal to the rubes who play hidden object games, and the game didn't do well enough to make him want to try the style again, which I think's a real shame. After Rewind, they made the Countess, where at Coddington Manor to investigate the disappearance of Lady Eleanor Coddington, considered to be a good friend of the Master Detective. Now, wouldn't this plot have been a lot more effective if the person we were meeting was someone we actually knew from a past game in the series, not someone just randomly pulled out of nowhere? In this game, we're periodically haunted by the Shade, a creature which feeds off creativity. Eleanor's ancestor Gloria fed the Shade her children's stories like an idiot, which gave the creature more and more power until it dragged Gloria into the mirror world. But despite it being meant to be a twisted version of reality, the mirror world looks incredibly basic in this game. It's a mansion, but a very generic one that feels incredibly similar to some of the other mansions we visited in the series. We find Eleanor in this mirror limbo world and learn that Eleanor wasn't actually descended from Gloria, but from a tryst that Earl William Coddington had with the maid Gemma Tuttle. So, because of this, only Gloria is able to perform the blood ritual and put an end to the Shade. In the end, we manage to find her, who's been trapped here in the limbo mirror world for decades, and through a cutscene whose animation looks particularly bad even for Eipix standards, she helps us rescue Eleanor and Camille, the interior designer, destroying the mirror on the Shade so she can't get back into the real world. The Shade as a villain is just incredibly uninteresting to me. She barely even appears or does anything to attack the Master Detective. It just seems like a much worse executed version of the Dire Grove Banshee. With the Banshee, you would feel like the whole land was her snowy domain, and at least she had a good reason to not attack us because she wanted us to free her. With the Shade, there's none of that sort of thing. For this game's Collector's Edition, you have morphing objects to find in each room. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! In the bonus game, we get to play as Gordon Coddington, Eleanor's father, who came to Coddington Manor to seek answers regarding his family. We even see Gemma the maid as a spirit who was Gordon's mother, and she has a much more significant role in this than she did in the main game. And it's even revealed at the end that Gordon is the one who sealed the mansion up like the master detective finds it in the main game, which gives a nice bit of extra lore. But in this bonus game, we have a confrontation with the Shade, finally getting to see its true form, not just the evil replica of Gloria. I'm not sure why something like this was saved until the bonus game, but it was. And the 3D model for the Shade looks absolutely awful. Honestly, I'd say it's the worst looking visual effect in the series. Yeah, some of the 3D models in Fate's Carnival didn't look that great either, but here it's supposed to be a big threatening main villain. And what makes the effect even worse is that it's locked behind the Collector's Edition paywall. They charge you extra for the privilege of feasting your eyes on such an effect. I have no idea how someone at Eipix looked at that, thought, yeah, that looks good enough, and released the game with it like this. But that just goes to show how Eipix were really willing to crank out some of these entries. That's probably the best way I can describe the Countess. It feels the most rushed. Like they had to have a game for the usual November release, so they just cobbled this together very quickly. Probably most of their time in 2018 was spent on Rewind, making sure to get that game to look faithful to the classic era, and they had to whip up the Countess pretty fast because God forbid they would decide to delay a game releasing in order to make it better. That might cut into potential profits, and we can't have that. The next game they made was Moths to a Flame, and this one I actually kind of like a bit. This time we aren't sent on the mission by the Queen, but just a nameless MCF agent. Isn't that mysterious? Also, we get issued Mac, our mechanical automated companion. This is an MCF badge that transforms into a little moth automaton. Get it? Because the game's called Moths to a Flame. We use Mac a few times in this early section, and it's cool that they actually made the inventory icon get animated when Mac can be used. As we get up to the Zenith Museum of Oddities, we learn that 3 MCF agents have gone missing. Chloe Watson, Aidan Miller, and Blake Parker. But when we get inside, we learn that Mac is actually evil, and the whole thing was a trap that was set up by the archivists. There are 3 rooms in this museum, one based on Ravenhearst, one based on Madame Fate, and one based on Broken Hour. In the Ravenhearst room, when I first played the game, I was all ready to despise it, because there's a dead skeleton of Fabiano, the world's strongest man here, my favorite character. However, fortunately, they didn't actually kill him off, it's just an illusion that the archivist built. To get into the Madame Fate room of the museum, we play a fun little shooting gallery puzzle. Neither Madame Fate nor Fate's Carnival actually let us physically play a shooting gallery, even though they appeared in both games. So props to Eipix for finally adding one. Isis is also here in the Madame Fate room, but we saw her go up into heaven in Fate's Carnival. It's nice to see Isis again, even if she is a fake illusion. After doing this opening museum section, then we progress onto larger sections that are based on each of the 3 games. These aren't supposed to actually be us traveling into the past, it's just modern day, new areas built that are more inspired by the way things were in the earlier games. It's a small thing, but I really appreciate how they actually put in the effort to change the HUD's icons depending on what section of the game you're in. The first area we go to is Broken Hour, where we work with Blake Parker. We have to deal with the shifting rooms of Huxley's boarding house again. And now you might be thinking, well, why would they choose Broken Hour of all the games to bring back? Well, it's because they can easily reuse many assets from that game. There's different puzzles and items in the rooms, but the general room designs are clearly copy and pasted from Broken Hour with minor adjustments. One thing I found funny in this section is that it seems like Eipix themselves prefer the art style of Rewind, because in the painting puzzle they use Charlotte and Benjamin Wright's appearances from Rewind instead of their earlier looks from the games. In the Ravenhearst section, we reunite with Chloe Watson. They also reuse some rooms from Key to Ravenhearst here, but at least things are a bit more original. I enjoy the look of the painted tarp for the sky in these rooms, like the archivist didn't finish designing them and just thought, it looks good enough, the master detective won't care. In the Madame Fate section, we meet with Aidan Miller. It's cool they didn't just recreate stuff based on Fate's Carnival here, they even recreated the three-headed beast attraction from the original Madame Fate. And by shining a spotlight on it, we learn that the whole thing was a sham, and we even get a hidden object scene out of the items that made up this alleged beast. Probably it was a sham in Madame Fate 2, but we never actually got that confirmed in that game. My favorite part of this game overall is finally getting to spend significant amounts of time with other MCF agents. In Ravenhearst Unlocked, we met Ellen Hornbolt, but she split from us really quickly. Here in Moths to a Flame, we spend a lot more time with our fellow MCF agents, and this helps to show that the MCF agency isn't just the master detective, which is how it felt for pretty much all the other entries in the series. I think the archivist is a great villain too. He's someone who clearly has immense talent with all the complex machinery he was able to make, and since he's studied the master detective's past cases in great detail, he's able to be an almost worthy rival, and he comes close to actually beating us, but of course he's not quite good enough. He can't figure out how we solved some of our past cases and accuses us of cheating because he's a genius. He should be able to figure them out. This reminds me a lot of Riddler from the Arkham games, and that's a huge positive because I'm probably the biggest Arkham Riddler fan on this planet. In the end, we refuse to play the archivist games anymore the way he wants, and we wake up in chambers he kept us in where he was trying to steal our intelligence through these hallucination rooms. Uniting together, we actually get to play as all 4 of the MCF agents for this super puzzle, the only time in the series where we get to play as someone other than the master detective in the main game itself. By coming together, we're able to overload the system and defeat the archivist by making him blow up from green energy. Yeah, he's super dead. And there's even a slight teaser for the next game by seeing a woman watch the green lightning storm from a cell and smiling. This time around, the collector's edition adds stamps to find in the rooms. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! And there are morphing objects in the hidden object scenes. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Nothing! There's also the return of the souvenir room, and in the bonus game we find that the archivist left a Mac unit in the basement of the MCF agency he used to work at. This is the first bonus game in the Eipix Era where the master detective is the playable character and not someone else. We also played as the master detective in Rewind, but that could hardly be considered a bonus game, more just a collection of hidden object scenes. It's neat to finally get to see the MCF agency for the first time in the series, even if it is just its basement. And at the end, we managed to stop a bomb the archivist left for us and save the whole building. Overall, I enjoyed Moths to a Flame quite a bit more than some of the earlier Eipix MCFs, Rewind excluded of course. And even though they did reuse some rooms from the earlier games, it still had plenty of new puzzles and things to do in these rooms. Next came Black Crown, the final MCF game that Eipix would make, and it was a pretty solid entry to go out on, I'd say. Once more, we go back to the Manchester Provincial Lunatic Asylum. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Eipix brought it back in the first MCF game, Key to Ravenhearst, and now it's here in the final one they make. We investigate the mysterious Patient 11, who is the one seen at the end of Moths to a Flame, and play a pretty fun hidden object scene where we find items hidden in the scribblings she made on her cell walls. She gets kidnapped by asylum patients, and so we and the asylum staff, Dr. Nathaniel Norton and Nurse Daphne Lors, head to the Crown Estate. Here we even get to use a pocket watch that acts as a compass to find certain points of interest in the rooms. The Crown Estate is the ancestral home of the pirate Phineas Crown, making this a sequel to 13th Skull. I'm not sure why someone like Phineas, who had generational old money wealth, would want to be a pirate to get even more, but maybe it was just more about the thrill of it for him. My favorite aspect of this game is that it has a lot more open level design. In pretty much all the Eipix games, the formula was you have one, or in rare cases 2 rooms that you get to explore at a time. But here we have access to several rooms in the Crown Estate, and once we go to the smuggling town underground, we get access to several more to explore all over. These also involve a lot more backtracking to past rooms to finish things up, and it's nice to spend so much time in one area that has more things to do in it, rather than needing to speed through to get to the next section like it was in many of the earlier Eipix games. When we find the titular Black Crown, it's revealed that the mysterious asylum patient was Magnolia Blanston, who was retconned as surviving the ending of 13th Skull. The game explains that she survived because Phineas kept her alive so she could get him this crown, but Phineas was also clearly intended to be permanently defeated in 13th Skull's bonus game. Phineas's ghost now possesses Magnolia, and he forces us to work to get his ship, the Curse, seaworthy again before he'll let her go. Once we do this, however, it's revealed that Dr. Norton and Nurse Daphne are also evil and working with Crown in order to have immortality as long as the ship is sailing the seas. We even find out we're part of Crown's crew due to us unknowingly signing a contract early in the game. And even though it's just for this final section of the game, I love being able to actually be on a pirate ship sailing the ocean, not just stuck in a swamp like in 13th Skull. The Black Crown gives Phineas immortality, but he stole it from a voodoo priestess. When we return the crown to her remains, it destroys the ship and defeats Phineas, hopefully for good this time. And we even manage to save Magnolia too, so hopefully she turns good for the rest of her life. The collector's edition adds a souvenir room, and this time there are both crabs and morphing objects to find in the rooms. Do you know what you get from collecting these? Double nothing! However, even though Eipix were almost finished working on the MCF series, they had to throw in one last thing to really piss me off. In the bonus game, the Master Detective returns to Louisiana to face off against some swamp monsters. Now, Eipix must have clearly played 13th Skull because they ripped many things from that game for this one. Yet, the layout of Louisiana in the bonus game is totally wrong to how it was in 13th Skull. Which is just very annoying to get something basic like that wrong. But what I really hate is that Mama Amy gets unceremoniously killed off by the swamp creatures. We don't even get to speak to her at all beforehand, we just get her letter, and then when we find her, she's already dead. Boy, great job, Eipix. We really needed to have that addition to the series in this game, didn't we? At the end of the bonus game, we managed to lift the curse from the ghosts inhabiting the swamp monsters and lay him to rest, and then we find the skull of Phineas Crown to burn it and stop him for good. Again. Hopefully, for real, it's the final time we see Phineas this time. And now, what's the final puzzle, and therefore the last ever impression Eipix makes on the series? Is it a nice large super puzzle? No. Is it perhaps a creative recreation of a puzzle from 13th Skull? No. Is it something new to the series that's really fun, unique, and creative? No. It's just an incredibly basic Match 3 minigame you've seen in a dozen other games. Now, I'd say that's even more of a whimper than even Big Fish Studios left the series on. I consider the Eipix Era to be the dark ages of MCF. Graphically, some of the games looked absolutely awful, and some of their lore contributions were even worse. And the games have the biggest feeling of being lazily made and like they were just grinding them out twice a year. Eipix as a studio was putting out an absurd amount of games. In 2015, besides Key to Ravenhearst and Ravenhearst Unlocked, Eipix released 21 other hidden object games, while in 2019 they only made 11 non-MCF games besides Moths to a Flame and Black Crown. Since they dialed things back in 2019, that's probably why I feel those two games are better and higher quality than a lot of the earlier ones in the Eipix era. And with the last games they showed that they could focus on MCF more and put more effort into the releases, and if they had done that from the start, maybe I'd like all the games of the era, even Key to Ravenhearst, maybe. What makes it tough, though, to view the Eipix Era as a whole is that it wasn't totally bad. If it was just all the games were awful, or all the games were just bland and basic with no redeeming factors, then that would make it much easier for me to dismiss the era as a whole. But there were diamonds in the rough. I love Rewind, and it would have been great to see Eipix take another stab at a classic era MCF game. Moths to a Flame had a great villain in the Archivist, and it was cool to interact with fellow MCF agents. And generally, I enjoy the puzzles found across all of these Eipix MCF games, especially the super puzzles they made. But that just serves to make the flaws in these even worse, because Eipix clearly had talent, and if they had gone full focus on an MCF game, it would have turned out amazing. And yeah, I know they couldn't because they had so many other franchises to work on, but I don't care about them. I'm MCFPapa, not hidden object game genre in general Papa, and my point is that MCF deserved to have a lot more of a focus placed on it, because it was the pioneering hidden object series that put the genre on the map for Big Fish. If MCF had never existed, then Eipix themselves wouldn't have been able to make the 121 hidden object games they managed to, and they wouldn't have been nearly as successful as a studio. And I found it frankly insulting how low effort some of these Eipix MCF games were, like they didn't give a hoot about the series at all. Just a few weeks after Black Crown released, Eipix was bought out by Playrix, and so they stopped making PC hidden object games entirely. Instead, they were put to work primarily on mobile games catering to the super casual gaming crowd. And these mobile games honestly make the Eipix Era MCF games look like Citizen Kane. I hope that the buyout meant that all the developers got to keep their jobs, and that there wasn't any mass layoffs that are pretty common among these sorts of corporate takeovers. Even though I heavily dislike some of their games, I wouldn't want to see anyone lose their jobs. But I'm also not shedding any tears that Eipix is no longer in control of the series. Once more, Big Fish played hot potato with the rights to MCF, and this time around they gave Grandma Studios the series. But what do I think of the Grandma era of MCF? I'll talk about them in the next retrospective part, so like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next bonus video.